Slavery exists with us today on a totally unprecedented scale. There are actually more people living in slavery today than any other time in human history. And what our report has found is that it not only disproportionately affects women and girls, but that the continuation of the enslavement of women and girls around the world is intrinsically tied to sustainable development and gender inequality. We know that 1 in every 130 women and girls globally is living in modern slavery. And to put that in perspective, that's more than the entire population of Australia. So there are more women and girls in slavery than there are citizens of Australia, a country of the G20.
So Grace, help me understand why women and girls are so at risk. You mentioned that figure, 1 in every 130 females living in modern slavery. That seems like an incredible number to comprehend.
It is an incredible number, and shockingly, it is actually a conservative one because this data doesn't take into account the predicted ramifications of COVID-19. We have already seen forced and child marriages rise. We've seen existing exploitation greatly exacerbated from global supply chain disruptions. So what I can tell you is that 1 in 130 is a baseline estimate. This report looks at how gender stacks the odds against girls from conception throughout their lives. And it finds that women and girls are disproportionately affected in situations of forced marriage, in almost all cases of commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking, but they are also overrepresented in forced labour. And in every form of slavery, women and girls are vulnerable on top of their exploitation to sexual violence and abuse. There are a number of reasons why this continued exploitation occurs. One of them is harmful cultural norms and practices, but the one that we're really focusing on are the existing roadblocks that continue today for women and girls to fully and freely participate. There are still 136 countries that have not legislated against forced and child marriage, so the majority of our nations have not said that it is not okay for a girl to be forced to marry against her will. And when she is forced to marry, a number of other life options and outcomes for her are completely ruled out, such as finishing school, having any kind of further education, even having the opportunity to work or leave that household at all.
And you mentioned that governments have a role to play here, but the private sector, perhaps most importantly, has a role to play as well. What are some of the practical steps that big business can put in place to ensure that modern slavery doesn't exist within their operations and within their supply chains?
The first step is certainly about transparency. I think it has become a normalised part of our economy to not truly know how far your supply chain reaches. And at Walk Free, we work with a number of multinationals through the Bali Process Government and Business Forum, be it Walmart to Adidas, looking at supermarket goods to clothing. And these supply chains can reach across dozens of countries from where they procure the goods that make that final product. Corporations, CEOs and boards are responsible for every person in their supply chain, not just the first 2 tiers. And we as consumers need to make sure that that transparency is prioritised. Coming down to simple things that businesses can do to ensure that there is less likelihood of slavery and exploitation is getting rid of pay-for-job models where migrant workers too often have to pay to get a job and then work to pay off that debt, often working 12 to 18 months without ever earning any money, with an exorbitant middleman taking that cost in the middle. That is unacceptable. There should not be anyone paying for a job in the 21st century, and transnational companies need to prioritise that. The second is ensuring a living wage. This is nothing fancy. A living wage literally means enough to live off, and yet absolutely the vast majority of people working throughout the global south in supply chains that connect to all of us in the Western world are not afforded that right. And that is simply not good enough. We must ensure that there is a basic level of human rights and a basic level of protection for all people within global supply chains.